You wake up, check your phone, nothing, no texts, no missed calls, no one wondering where you've been. At first, you think it's just a quiet morning, but then you realize it's been like this for weeks. Months even. The silence isn't temporary, it's your reality. You're not antisocial, you're not a hermit by choice. You simply have no friends, and the worst part, you don't even know how it happened. Today, we're diving into the psychology behind friendlessness, not the surface-level advice, not the just put yourself out there cliches, but the real, uncomfortable truth about why some people end up completely alone, and why escaping it feels impossible. This isn't about blame, it's about understanding, because once you see the invisible patterns trapping millions in isolation, everything changes. Let's begin. There's a specific type of quiet that haunts your days, not the calm quiet of choosing solitude, but the suffocating kind that fills your lungs when you notice your phone hasn't received a real conversation in months. It's the quiet of moving through packed streets while feeling utterly unseen, of holding ideas you're desperate to express but having nowhere to voice them, of reaching small milestones in complete silence and shouldering failures without anyone to lean on. This is the lived experience for countless individuals who exist without friendship, not through desire, but through life's circumstances. You'd likely think these are withdrawn people who actively choose isolation, but that perspective overlooks something critical. The psychological reality behind friendlessness runs far deeper than mere preference or temperament. It's an intricate system of historical wounds, conditioned responses, and survival strategies that frequently lock people into patterns they're fighting to escape. Examining this psychology exposes something unsettling about human bonds themselves, how delicate they truly are, how swiftly they can vanish, and how challenging they become to restore once they've dissolved. When scientists examine social disconnection, they uncover something striking. The mind of someone living friendless doesn't simply long for companionship. It actually undergoes structural transformation. Brain circuits linked to social understanding begin deteriorating. The regions responsible for decoding expressions and understanding social signals grow dormant. It's as though the brain, starved of human interaction, starts losing its capacity to bond. This isn't fragility or preference. It's neuroplasticity, the brain reshaping itself to survive isolation. But how does anyone arrive at this reality initially? The journey to friendlessness seldom occurs suddenly. It's typically a slow wearing away that starts with minor wounds or letdowns. Perhaps it originated in youth with exclusion from group activities. Maybe it was a close friend who betrayed confidences meant to remain secret, or a circle that gradually disappeared without reason, leaving someone questioning their own mistakes. Each incident creates what researchers term social conditioning. The brain starts connecting vulnerability with suffering, trust with betrayal, and authenticity with abandonment. So defensive walls emerge. It instructs the person to retreat, to reveal less, to anticipate less from people. These aren't deliberate choices. They're instinctive protections built to avoid future damage. Eventually, these defensive shields become hidden walls. The person begins interpreting ordinary social exchanges as evidence of rejection. They overanalyze delayed messages or rescheduled meetings. They believe others are simply being courteous when expressing warmth. This heightened alert for social dismissal generates a self-perpetuating cycle. The more they anticipate rejection, the more their behavior actually creates distance. There's another dimension to this psychology that's frequently missed. Friendless individuals often cultivate an extraordinarily active mental narrative. When outside dialogue vanishes, inner dialogue amplifies. They constantly revisit previous encounters, dissecting every phrase and movement for concealed significance. They mentally prepare for future exchanges that might never materialize. They construct detailed visions of connections they desperately desire. This interior realm becomes simultaneously shelter and confinement. It's a space where they can exist authentically without fear of criticism. But it's also a space where thoughts can intensify without grounding. Without friends to question their viewpoints or present different angles, their thinking can grow progressively inflexible or warped. The paradox is that numerous friendless people possess remarkable emotional perception. They've invested so much time studying human interaction from the periphery that they frequently grasp social mechanics better than active participants. They can detect dishonesty instantly. They recognize when someone's expression contradicts their emotion. They catch delicate changes in collective atmosphere that others entirely overlook. But this enhanced perception becomes dangerous. When you can penetrate surface-level courtesies and identify forced friendships, accepting anything less than genuine connection grows harder. The challenge is that genuine connection demands vulnerability from everyone involved. And vulnerability feels terrifying when previous wounds still ache, so they hold back. They hold back for someone who seems trustworthy enough to risk exposure with. Someone who shows authentic curiosity rather than social courtesy. Someone who can embrace their intensity without feeling overwhelmed or scared away. But while they are holding out for this ideal bond, they frequently seem cold or disengaged to others, building a wall that blocks even promising friendships from developing. The psychology of disconnection also impacts how these people perceive themselves. Without friendship's reflection to show their valuable traits, they frequently construct a distorted self-portrait. They fixate on their assumed weaknesses and dismiss their assets. They persuade themselves they possess nothing meaningful to contribute to relationships. This self-concept becomes a filter through which they process every social encounter. When someone does express interest in knowing them, they often cannot accept it as real. They suspect the person must need something, or they're simply being polite, or they'll ultimately recognize what's deficient with them and disappear. This doubt, though rooted in previous suffering, destroys current possibilities. What makes this especially heartbreaking is that friendless people often desire connection more powerfully than anyone else. They've lived through its absence so completely that they comprehend its significance in ways others overlook. They don't seek shallow acquaintances or superficial interaction. They yearn for the type of friendship where quiet feels natural, where they can exist completely unfiltered, where they're genuinely understood and valued. This hunger for substance over quantity means they frequently dismiss chances for lighter social bonds that could eventually evolve into something deeper through time. They want to bypass pleasantries and plunge directly into profound dialogue. But most bonds require time to cultivate that degree of faith and closeness. The adjustment to friendlessness also transforms how they process time and recollection. Without collective experiences to ground their memories, time can feel simultaneously vacant and burdensome. They might find it difficult to recall recent activities because nothing especially significant occurred. Or they might obsess over brief encounters because they represented their only human contact all week. Their connection with solitude grows conflicted. On one side, they've mastered being comfortable alone because survival demanded it. They've cultivated rich mental landscapes, artistic outlets, and self-directed passions. But this ease with solitude can also become a snare. The longer they remain alone, the more alien social engagement becomes. The more alien it becomes, the more anxious they grow about interacting with others. And the more anxious they grow, the more they withdraw into solitude. The pattern intensifies when they recognize how much social capability they've surrendered through absence of practice. Dialogue that once flowed naturally now demands conscious calculation. They question their contributions, overanalyze their pacing, and scrutinize every subtle reaction for hints of boredom or awkwardness. What used to feel instinctive becomes forced, like attempting to recall how to balance on a bicycle after years of only walking. This social awkwardness creates a bitter irony, the exact thing they need most, practice with human bonds, becomes what they dread most because they feel inadequate for it. They recognize they're rusty, which intensifies their nervousness, which worsens their performance, which validates their conviction that they're incompetent at relationships. It's a reinforcing pattern that constricts with each unsuccessful try. There's also the challenge of social expectations that friendless people must manage. Society demands particular social demonstrations. It demands you have people to contact when excitement strikes. It demands you have someone to accompany to celebrations or gatherings. It demands you have character witnesses beyond workplace connections. When you lack these things, you begin sensing you're fundamentally failing at existence itself. They create complex systems to conceal their friendlessness. They refuse invitations rather than acknowledge they lack anyone to bring along. They fabricate reasons for avoiding group participation. They master redirecting discussions about social activities or weekend adventures. This perpetual pretense of maintaining a social existence when you don't is draining and further distances them from authentic bonds. The digital era has introduced additional complexity to this psychology. Social platforms deliver a relentless feed of other people's friendships, festivities, and networks. They browse through images of collective meals, travel adventures, and celebrations, sensing they're witnessing life unfold for everyone except themselves. The contrast becomes inescapable and agonizing. Everyone else appears to have mastered something they're lacking. Yet ironically, digital environments can also offer salvation. Unnamed discussion boards, virtual groups, and online friendships provide a type of connection that seems less risky. They can express ideas and stories without the exposure of direct interaction. They can withdraw if situations grow uncomfortable. But these digital bonds, while precious, often emphasize what they're missing in tangible reality. The lack of friends also alters their connection with their own feelings. Without someone to share experiences with, emotions can grow overpowering or bewildering. Happiness feels incomplete when there's nobody to celebrate with. Grief feels endless when there's nobody to console them. Frustration has nowhere to flow except internally. They become their own emotional regulation system, which functions to a degree. But human feelings were meant to be exchanged and validated through relationships. This emotional seclusion can create a form of emotional accumulation. They store up narratives, moments, and reflections, hoping eventually they'll find someone to reveal them to. But when that someone materializes, if they ever do, the narratives feel outdated and the feelings have lost their intensity. They understand they cannot release years of stored experiences on a new person without overwhelming them. The psychology of friendlessness also includes a complicated relationship with optimism. Some moments they feel encouraged that circumstances will shift, that they'll encounter someone who comprehends them, that they'll discover their community. Other moments they feel accepting of a solitary existence, persuading themselves it's simpler this way. This fluctuation between optimism and acceptance becomes its own type of emotional depletion. They frequently cultivate an intensified vulnerability to dismissal, genuine or imagined. A slow text reply becomes proof of indifference. A rescheduled appointment becomes evidence that they're not worth someone's effort. A group discussion that continues without their contribution becomes verification that they don't fit. These readings aren't always precise, but when you're already feeling exposed, your mind tends to validate your deepest anxieties rather than dispute them. What's especially moving is how this influences their ability for self-assertion. Friendless people often become masterful at satisfying everyone else's requirements while ignoring their own. They're so appreciative for any social contact that they tolerate behavior they wouldn't normally accept. They become excessively accommodating, compliant, and adaptable, hoping that being uncomplicated will make people want to maintain them around. But this people-satisfying approach often fails because it blocks authentic relationships from emerging. When you're perpetually adjusting yourself to what you believe others desire, You never allow them opportunity to recognize or value who you genuinely are. You become a mirror of their tastes rather than a unique person deserving of friendship. The anxiety of being excessive becomes crushing. They watch themselves relentlessly for indications that they are revealing too much, investing too much, or requiring too much. This self-monitoring generates an artificial separation even when they're physically present with others. They are so occupied controlling their own conduct that they cannot be genuinely engaged in the moment. Time assumes a different character when you lack friends. Weekends expand infinitely without arrangements or social structure. Holidays transform into reminders of absence rather than occasions to embrace. Birthdays pass silently, occasionally without anyone acknowledging. The life tempo that others accept as natural. The organic rhythm of social bonds simply doesn't exist. Yet within this apparently empty territory, something extraordinary often develops. The absence of outside affirmation demands a confrontation with the self that most people never encounter. Without friends to mirror back who they are, they must uncover their own identity through internal discovery. This can generate profound self-comprehension, imagination, and autonomy that others might never achieve. They become experts of their own presence. They discover what genuinely fascinates them versus what they assumed they should find interesting to blend with others. They pursue activities and enthusiasms that are authentically theirs, not shaped by collective dynamics or social influence. In numerous ways, they understand themselves better than people encircled by friends ever could. This profound self-perception generates an intriguing contradiction. While they struggle with social bonds, they often hold exceptional understanding of human behavior. Having witnessed relationships from the exterior for so extended, they comprehend the structure of friendship in ways that participants might overlook. They can recognize the unstated rankings, the delicate controls, the theatrical elements of social engagement that others remain unaware of. But this insight can become another obstacle. Once you perceive how much of social engagement is performance, participating authentically becomes challenging. You begin questioning whether people genuinely appreciate you or simply value having an observer. You question if the amusement is sincere or dutiful. You examine every action for traces of falseness, making it virtually impossible to settle into natural bonds. The expectation of social situations becomes its own type of agony. They invest days preparing for a basic coffee gathering, practicing dialogues, and forecasting every potential direction the exchange might follow. When the actual meeting happens, they're emotionally drained from the mental rehearsal. The naturalness that makes relationships pleasurable has been substituted by strategic performance. Their inner judge grows more forceful in the absence of outside perspectives. Without friends to contest negative internal dialogue or supply alternative viewpoints, they can become stuck in loops of uncertainty and severe self-condemnation. The voice in their consciousness grows more commanding because it's the sole voice they hear regularly. It becomes accuser, decision maker, and judge of every social error. Rest patterns often shift when you exist without friends. The silent nighttime periods that others occupy with calls, message exchanges, or social arrangements stretch endlessly. The consciousness, lacking outside engagement, focuses inward, frequently at the most difficult moments. Sleep becomes a confrontation with isolation rather than a smooth shift to rest. They cultivate an acute awareness of the social patterns surrounding them. They observe when colleagues arrange meals without inviting them. They watch how effortlessly others establish circles and partnerships. They become researchers of human bonds, examining behavioral tendencies they cannot quite reproduce themselves. This observational ability is simultaneously blessing and burden, offering awareness while emphasizing their separation. The idea of home transforms when you lack friends. Home becomes the sole location where they can genuinely lower their social defenses. But it can also transform into a comfort zone that's too appealing to abandon. The external reality begins feeling progressively unfamiliar and menacing. Home becomes simultaneously haven and cage, providing security at the expense of development. Their relationship with digital tools reflects this isolation in intricate ways. They might endlessly browse through social platforms, pursuing connection through watching others' existences, or they might shun it completely, incapable of enduring the persistent reminder of what they're missing. Technology provides the appearance of connection while frequently intensifying the sensation of isolation. Comprehending the psychology of friendless people reveals something significant about the human experience itself. That connection isn't merely beneficial to possess, it's fundamental to our existence. But perhaps most crucially, it demonstrates that isolation isn't a personality defect or individual shortcoming. It's frequently the outcome of defensive strategies that once fulfilled a function but now obstruct the exact thing the soul desires most. For those navigating this journey, understand that your intensity, your awareness, your hard-earned self-understanding aren't barriers to friendship. They're precisely what makes you valuable to know.